This is 8 Minute Climate Fix, a podcast helping you understand the energy and climate challenge in just a few minutes. I'm your host, Paul Schuster. It's no secret that the immense growth of AI data centers is hitting the power grid hard. The utility industry isn't used to this type of hypergrowth, and it's just trying to keep up. The result has been some questionable decisions on how to bring new power onto the grid, such as repurposing a whole bunch of jet engines to run 24/7 next to a data center. Solutions that may have been fast to do, but are horribly inefficient from a cost, environmental, noise, or community perspective. But there is an option to unlock new generation quickly, cheaply, and climate-friendly, tapping into distributed resources such as rooftop solar and storage. In today's episode, I sit with Sachu Constantine, Executive Director of Vote Solar, to unpack why these distributed resources aren't being used more in order to enable the economic opportunities of AI data center growth. 8 minutes. It's how long it takes the sun's rays to hit Earth, or about how long it takes for the global AI industry to draw nearly 240 gigawatts of power. And Deloitte expects that number to increase 30 times by 2030. We need all the tools in the belt to handle this one. Let's get it on. Sachu, welcome to 8 Minute Climate Fix.
Paul, thanks for having me. This is great. I'm excited for this conversation.
I think we could not have a more timely conversation about some of the challenges that are occurring in the broader energy industry, but also the digital infrastructure space as well. So let's dig into it. But before we do, Sachu, can you give me a little bit of an overview as to who you are and Vote Solar?
Yeah, happily, and thanks for asking that question. So I am the executive director of Vote Solar. Vote Solar is a national nonprofit working to make clean energy a part of our energy system. Not just a part, but actually the key basis for our energy system. This is our 25th year working at this. So that's an exciting milestone for us. We've been working at the state level to create the policies and the practices and the awareness that can help us make this transition to a future, clean, reliable, affordable energy system. First of all, through activating people's choice and their ability to choose solar and to go solar or vote solar, if you will. And now increasingly by pushing the policies that help enable all of the benefits of solar, all of the attributes of solar to flourish, to provide value, to receive credit for that value. And we work both in the technical realms of regulatory commissions, but also on campaigns and movement-oriented politics, and often in coalition. So I'm excited to be here. I come from an international clean energy and environmental background and a regulatory background. And here at Vote Solar, I get to work with just the most incredible array of people and skills and backgrounds. And I'm glad to be here talking about this at a moment, as you said, when there's tremendous change afoot, and we all know that change is opportunity, but it can play both ways. So we are really focused on making this a moment of great positive change.
Well, congratulations on reaching 25 years. That's a big milestone, regardless of what industry or organization that you happen to be a part of. But I could not agree more in the fact that we are at a real tipping point. Maybe not a tipping point, but a real interesting time when it comes to the electric power industry, right? It was tough enough when we didn't have huge growth on the demand side to think about bringing clean energy onto the grid and what exactly that meant. Now, all of a sudden, we have data centers, large load electrification of vehicles and buildings that are coming onto the grid and stressing the grid in a brand new way. Let's dig into this. Okay, give us a high level overview as to what that landscape kind of looks like today and why that's been difficult for us as an industry to wrap our arms around compared to how we've traditionally thought about load growth, demand growth, and what exactly that means for the grid.
Sure. And man, Paul, that is a Gordian knot of issues and things to talk about. But I think it's really important to ask that question, and we can untie them, right? We can pull these threads a little bit and see where they lead. So let's think about, first of all, I do want to back up and say, let's think about the grid. The grid is this very complex machine that has to balance both the generation and the demand. That's how the electricity system works. We have the same energy going in as is being used at any given time. So we're all about balancing that. Historically, our grid has grown up by building big fossil combustion plants, whether it was coal or gas, maybe some hydro thrown in there. And it kind of, we set a base load and we had some peaking capacity, and we just balanced, we balanced the generation to the load. Where we are right now in that grid frame is that we have more, first of all, more load coming on at a record pace, whether it's data centers or all the electrification that you mentioned, these large load interconnections. And that demand, that load is more flexible. It requires more flexibility. It has to operate in different ways at different times. Well, at the same time that that's happening, we've got more flexible types of generation, both in terms of where the generation happens and how it happens, and what the source of power is. So we're actually facing a really great opportunity. Load growth is, if taken the right way and if policy accounts for it, can be a very good thing. It means you're using the assets on the grid more effectively. But if you don't plan for it the right way, if you try to match the wrong kind of generation with this new growing load, whatever form it takes, you can end up exacerbating things like affordability. That's one of the crises that we face right now, skyrocketing prices. You can exacerbate the vulnerability of our system to a more hostile climate. So there's a reliability and a resilience question that we have to answer when we're balancing these two things. And and I think within all of that, it's what is the best, most efficient way from a societal point of view to supply the energy needed for our economy and make sure that everyone, every part of our society has a stake in that, has a share, not only in the benefits, but are fairly, and I use that word purposefully, that are fairly sharing in the costs of balancing the system. This is a colossal, this is a tidal change in terms of who's accountable and who has agency, who has choice. Distributed solar and batteries and other distributed technologies are shifting power. The monopoly that we used to have for big utilities is not the same as it was even 5 years ago, let alone a decade ago. So we have to think really differently about how we build this. And we know that looming in the background is this question of climate change and the absolute necessity to transition to more clean, non-carbon, non-polluting forms of energy generation. So I think that change, 150 years of fossil dominance, giving way to a clean energy landscape, and addressing all of these tri crises, these multiple crises. That's the moment of change that we're in kind of a nutshell.
It's interesting because you kind of bring up two different things that are happening at the same time, right? One of which is we've got this huge load growth that's occurring at a pace that we have never really seen before, right? Anybody who's been in this space, the last couple of decades, load growth has averaged about 0.1%.
Effectively flat, right? Yeah.
And the reason why is despite all of the amazing things that have come online and new cloud services and plug-in devices like our Apple iPhones or whatever, despite all of that, a huge impact of energy efficiency that's helped to keep that demand from growing too fast. This year, the Department of Energy is projecting a 1.7% increase, and they're projecting just data centers alone are going to go from 4% of our electricity mix to 9% of our electricity mix by 2030. It's a huge shift in terms of how electricity demand is coming onto the grid. Utilities, to your point, 150 years of utilities, and they don't plan for this type of meteoric impact at a moment's notice, right? You're bringing entire cities worth of electricity consumption online all at once. And so, what's interesting is we've got that type of problem, and we've got this problem of the fact that we've built a grid upon fossil fuel generation that needs to transition over to clean energy if we're going to do anything meaningful about climate change, right? And that those two priorities are hitting each other and causing some friction. PJM just a couple weeks ago opened up their interconnection queue for new projects coming into PJM. They had 800 plus projects coming into PJM, 220 gigawatts of new capacity that's being planned for that region. Pennsylvania, Jersey, Maryland. It's kind of the independent system operator that operates everything from Illinois down to New Jersey. 106 gigawatts of that 220 projected is gas-fired generation. All right. We are answering this challenge by bringing on dirty fuels. Sachu, let's take this, and eventually we're going to get into the data center problem in and of itself. But unpack this for me a little bit. Okay, I just threw a whole bunch of numbers out there at you. What is that saying about our current state of the grid, the reliability of that grid, and some of the challenges that we have to face?
We are facing a new era, trying to address the issues and the problems of a new era with old solutions is a failed strategy, just right out the get-go. So one of our major Vote Solar objectives in the proceedings that we work in regulatory commissions is to really put the screws, so to speak, to the idea that we can build our way out of this through gas plants. First of all, new fossil fired generation has 5 to 8 year development timelines. We know the long timelines for nuclear. We know already what the constraints on the system are for meeting this new growing demand, as you say. And there is a fact out there that is really important, and that is that the fastest growing source of new energy globally, and the cheapest source of new energy globally, and the most flexible source of energy globally is solar, especially attached to batteries. And so it only makes sense that in the face of the numbers, the staggering numbers that you're putting out there, that we turn to the energy solution that is going to provide the most forward looking speed to power, speed to market that is going to put the most downward pressure on prices. Let's be honest, the cost of a transition is going to be expensive, but we can make it as little as possible, and we can share it, and we can direct the right investment dollars so that it doesn't become a huge energy burden for the people that need this power for both for their immediate needs, food storage, cooking, cleaning, medicinal or medical purposes, right? There's a variety of very important needs out there that we have to make affordable. So we have to think about all of that as we make this transition to meet, again, those staggering numbers. And let's not forget, Paul, to your point, we're going to talk about data centers today, but the need for power from electrification of vehicles is probably 2 to 3 or maybe even 4x that for data centers. The problem, and we'll get into this later, the problem with data centers is the way that demand and the place and the concentration of how that demand is coming onto the grid. So we can get into that in a minute, but the the grid of the future that we need to build to meet all of this demand has to take advantage of the most modern, most affordable resources out there. The PJM problem that you mentioned is there is a thumb on the scale, and it is unfortunately it is giving a lot of credit to and assigning benefit to fossil-fired resources without really dealing with the negative side of having more pollution, having a dependence on a global commodity that has a lot of fuel risk and price risk inherent in it, right? So the outcomes of these markets that determine how much and which resources enter into the queue is something that we really need to focus on. So, when we make choices about what to approve, we should be making sure that there's fairness involved, that people and communities get input and their concerns are being met, whether that's about the cost of electricity or the presence of pollution and demand in their neighborhoods. We need to make sure that any growth that happens, that load growth, is being shared properly across the system. There's one aspect of the grid that I think is really important for listeners to understand. That is that our pricing system for the grid shares costs. And we all, like, within your class, so residential class, you pay the average across your class. There might be some people who use more and are more expensive to serve and others who are less expensive to serve. We kind of even that out. And the reason we divide industrial and commercial out from residential is because the costs between those groups are very different. If we put them all together and we just build the system and then share the costs evenly, that would be like someone coming to your dinner party, ordering all the most expensive dishes and appetizers, and keeping it all for themselves, and then you all split the bill,
Right.
right?
Right.
That's the analogy here. And so when we think about data centers coming into this and that need in PJM or in MISO or in other RTOs, these regional transmission operators, how they're going to meet the data center load, it has to be fair. We have to talk about how costs will be shared. We have special classes for industrial customers. Let's think about what the appropriate version of that is for data centers coming on, and how that investment can be used to promote that grid of the future, to push us forward on economic development, on clean energy development, and this very important transition, while still protecting ratepayers and reliability.
So let's dig into that a little bit, okay? Because certainly anybody who is just cursorily, that is a horrible way to phrase that. Anyone who has a cursory understanding of this particular industry and challenge at this time is seeing these data centers coming online, seeing the affordability issue around our electricity rates, the retail rates, even though we've split, residential tariffs and the rates that we pay on a residential side and the rates that large commercial and industrial customers pay, and we've kind of split some of those things, we're still seeing the electricity rates go up, right? And there's the question, a natural question, is sit there and say, why can't a data center just build their own power facility and not have to have me as a homeowner pay anything to have that data center power come online? What's preventing that happening?
Well, first of all, it is happening, right? And unfortunately, the result of that process unfolding is that we have some companies putting strapping jet engines to their site, right, and aiming the back end of that jet engine at some local community. So maybe that seems okay to you as a ratepayer if you're 100 miles away, but if you live within 5 miles of that plant, the concept of bringing your own energy is a very good one, but the devil is going to be in the details on that. And I would venture that putting that policy in isolation, just saying, okay, fine, data centers are going to be expensive and they need a lot of power, so build your own power.
Mhm.
That is a missed opportunity. We talked about change being a moment of opportunity. There are billions, literally billions of dollars, a tidal wave of financing that are backing the development of data centers that want to build them. And I think, by the way, we should talk about different data centers at some point. But let's just take them as a general class. That is money that could be spent on really beneficial investments, not jet engines, not restarting old coal plants, not refurbishing formerly disgraced nuclear plants. In fact, it could be directed at multiple kinds of clean energy investments, including distributed solar and batteries in the communities surrounding the data center or anywhere across the service territory. Because, like I said, the whole system is about being in balance and making sure that the flow of electrons is correct. We want and need economic development and investment. There are many reasons to oppose data centers, but if you are going to build one, you should direct that investment and that build towards common purposes, building the more affordable, building the cleaner grid, making sure that the right assets are being deployed. And we do not want more jet engines, more fossil combustion deployed on our network. We know that's a backward strategy. That is a dead end solution. There are forward looking ways. Data centers are very hard because they are this large, somewhat inflexible right now. It can be more flexible, but large loads in one kind of single place, that can have a real impact. But let's be clear about one thing. It's disingenuous to suggest that data centers, either alone or even singularly significantly responsible for load growth. For the affordability crisis. That has come from things like dependence on high risk fuels that fluctuate on the market. It's poor investments by the utilities in both safety and in modern technology. It's building an inflexible system that pays the vast majority of its money for those few hours of peaking during the hottest summer days or the coldest winter nights. We can build a system that spreads those costs out, that does that much better. And data centers are just a tool or a window into how we can make those investments. They are not by themselves good or bad. They are dependent on the policies that we set in letting them connect to the grid.
A couple of things that I wanna dig into a little bit there, okay? One of which is you kinda touched upon when bringing your own power, and a data center bringing their own power to the grid, that fundamentally is a speed consideration for that data center developer. It's not necessarily how can I make this the most efficient or the most effective thing, to bring on. They're strapping, to your point, jet engines, spinning a turbine, spinning that magnet in order to create the electrons and everything. That is a horrible, horrible thing to do. Those jet engines are not meant to be spinning 24/7 the way a data center needs it to. They're running through maintenance after 3 years and having to replace those things. This is not the most efficient thing. It's a speed thing. And when you start looking at the costs and the inefficiencies of cost, when you're setting up a power facility at a data center behind the meter, essentially, and bringing your own power, all of the wonderful thing about the grid is that we can socialize the capacity of the large facilities across a number of different users, and we can stabilize the supply to the demand a little bit. To your point, we still have to plan for the peaking times. Everybody turns on their air conditioning at the same time, or everybody plugs in a Tesla at 7 o'clock in the evening when they get home from work, etc. But, when all of that power is directed to one entity, that one data center, they're putting 2 times, 3 times as much redundant capacity in place than they have to, right? There's a better way about this, and this gets to my second point around your, hidden point within the conversation that you just said was, it's not so much an infrastructure and technology problem as it is a system and market structure problem, right? How can we build a system to be more efficient in terms of how we're using capital, more efficient in terms of how we're using clean technologies, and how more efficient in terms of how we're protecting the ratepayers and everybody else that's associated with this entire ecosystem?
I think you're using the word efficiency exactly right here. Efficiency, whether it's economic efficiency or the subset of energy efficiency, both of which are essentially the same thing. What is the least amount of resources that I can use to get a task done,
Mhm.
or what is the most cost effective set of resources that I can use to get a task done? Some of that depends on who bears the cost, right? So for the data center, the speed is the factor, and those additional costs, the excess capital spend, the pollution impacts, whether it's air quality or noise or whatever, we aren't socializing those costs in the same way. So efficiency, it depends on the eye of the beholder, so to speak, right? But efficiency should be our goal in policy. Efficiency should be what markets yield. They should yield an efficient solution. So if we're getting inefficient solutions, it means there's a market or a policy distortion somewhere allowing that inefficient solution to happen. So if you are, for example, just to simply say, kind of in ways that the Trump administration does, well, okay, let's just let them do whatever they want and let's exempt them from emissions rules and do whatever. That's not an efficient solution to your point. We think about how to deploy resources to meet this capacity need that you're talking about and balancing across the whole system in the most capital efficient way, in the most technology efficient way, and with that same concentration on speeds. Call it speed to market or speed to power. And what we know is that a little bit of going slow at first actually gets you farther faster. So, for example, by deploying a gigawatt worth of distributed technology, so solar attached to batteries, coordinated with smart thermostats and other demand response measures and energy efficiency measures, there's a really reliable capacity value embodied in that whole class of assets. We can give value to that. We can create community power networks, which we also call virtual power plants or other things that have real capacity value because of their coordination through technology. And they are a faster, if not the fastest path to power, to market that we can build out there. As I said, even if they wanted to build gas turbines for peaking plant capacity or gas capacity at some of these data centers, there's a long wait for those turbines. Sunrun right now across the country deploys about a gigawatt of solar on rooftops annually. Just that one residential rooftop company. Well, let's coordinate all that. Let's put that together into this community power network virtual power plant scheme. Give it some capacity value. and deploy it effectively. That's going to do a bunch of things. It's going to meet this new demand growth from the data centers. It's going to take away those peaks because now we've got flexible demand, flexible generation, so that we even out the load across the grid. We're using those grid assets much more effectively. We've got more redundant backup power. That's not to say that you can't put power on the data center site. Sure, let's put some solar and put especially some storage on there. We have lots of good examples of different kinds of programs that we already have in place. And we already have millions of solar units out there that are not being used to their fullest economically and energy efficient purpose, if you will, right? So you are highlighting the exact right term. Let's find that efficient, neat, elegant solution that also moves us towards this clean energy future that I think we all have a stake in.
I think you just outlined it perfectly there. Okay. Everything from the inefficiencies and the externalities that are associated with the way we're doing data centers dumb right now, right? And there's a better way to do that. And the reality is that those inefficiencies and externality consequences are showing up with communities that are starting to push back upon these data centers, right? Data centers should be an economic development engine for regions within the United States. And right now, we're pushing back upon them because we're not being very smart in terms of how we deploy those economic engines. And then to your point, is distributed resources, virtual power plants, demand flexibility. These assets, whether it's tapping into existing resources and getting more capacity out of them, or building new ones and bringing them onto the grid in a faster, more reliable, cheaper fashion, that's something that needs to be tapped into. Sachu, what's holding us back from being able to do that? What's needed in order to unlock that opportunity?
Well, listen, let's not downplay something that we touched on at the beginning of this conversation. We are at a historical moment of inflection change. A century plus old industry is having to give way to new technology, new participants, new competition. That's always going to be hard, right? There's always going to be a rear guard action. Uh, and to be honest, we need to hold on to some gas resources. But instead of saying how are we transitioning off of that, we continue to see overly cautious and suspicious commissions deny the power of these virtual power plants, of this distributed network, to continually undercount or underplay the existence of these resources on the system and go for what they plausibly, I guess, think is the safer, better way, fossil. But that's again, it's trying to solve new problems with old solutions, and it's not the way forward. I think I think by and large, we we have an asset that we have already deployed that we're not using effectively. Let's try to use that more effectively. The virtual power plants, everything
Mhm.
we can build on that by creating more deployment opportunities. That means addressing things like permitting reform and interconnection reform, fixing the queues in the MISO area, which is what legislation like the Clean and Reliable Grid Affordability Act in Illinois does. We can authorize the utilities to take advantage of third-party customer-owned assets, like even front of the meter batteries or solar plants or community plants, and put that into their integrated resource planning. That is their planning proceedings, and count those resources to see what expensive peaking resources or what expensive dirty resources they can then eliminate. And what we'll see is a very, very fast transition to the co-investment of private third parties and the utilities and public dollars into a much more efficient integrated system. And that is the solution that we're all seeking. It's more reliable, it's more cost effective, it can deploy faster, it provides resilience in the face of extreme weather and a very old aging grid. And it can provide that kind of economic development. I do want to say something that you touched on, Paul, which I think is really important. Communities that are being asked to host data centers have real concerns. And it's not just about energy. At Vote Solar, we're focused on the cost of energy, the impacts on energy, and not missing this opportunity to channel those dollars into really good investments. But there's water impacts, there are noise and traffic impacts, and I'm not even addressing the whole question of reliance on artificial intelligence and data centers. But those are real impacts, and communities, out of a concern for fairness, ought to have some say. And what we're saying is that if a community does consent to have a data center located there, at the very least, it should follow certain standards about the energy that supplies that and about the way that it impacts people's rates and the infrastructure around them. So if you're going to provide growth and need new infrastructure, you carry the cost that you are adding to the system, and we spread it out fairly and evenly with what you pay for. That you really don't bring dirty energy supply in, that it's clean energy for any of your new demand, that you are taking steps with the regulator to limit negative impact on ratepayers, and that there really are economic benefits that accrue to these communities. All of those are preconditions. And then from our point of view, use the distributed energy programs that already exist, that have real value, that we can calculate and can provide assurances to the data center investors. That I think is a sort of minimum condition. The rest of that agency and choice is also important to elevate.
Could not agree more. And I think as we look at some of the communities that are pushing back, right? Where it's done well, for instance, Loudoun County in Virginia has long been, the epicenter of data center development. And to your earlier point, not all data centers are the same, right? It's red fish, blue fish type thing from Dr. Seuss, in the fact that the data centers of times past were co-located cloud-based software as a service serving data centers that we got as an industry pretty good at putting in place. These are smaller loads. These are 100 megawatt, 200 megawatt type of load types of data centers, and we can reasonably figure out what the reliability challenges are on the grid. We can reasonably figure out what the requirements are from a generating and infrastructure perspective, right? What a new substation is going to be for that. When all of a sudden you shift into an AI training data center or an AI inference data center, okay, the training is where the models do their sort of neural networking and try to figure out how exactly they're going to be artificial intelligent in the first place. And then the inference is every time that you tap into ChatGPT or Claude and you sit there and say, "Hey, could you please tell me where I can find my next iced coffee near me?" That is, those are two different types of aspects as well. Those are gigawatt style data centers. All right. Now, all of a sudden, this is a different type of data center. And that's what communities are pushing back on, because that type of load is new. It's got all those externalities that you're talking about with water, noise, land permit, all those types of things. None of which I'm going to touch on today, because all of a sudden our podcast went to 5 hours, and
I mean, I got time. We can stick around, but people may not stay with us.
but it's definitely a challenge, right? To your point though, as we start to think about the energy question and shifting to distributed resources and thinking about the costs associated with that and thinking about deploying new resources on the grid edge to help offset this load that's coming online. You talked about some of the roles that the utility plays in their planning procedures. You talked about the role that policymakers and regulators play in terms of easing that congestion and being more adaptable to some of the different challenges. What's the role of data center developers themselves in that equation, in that ecosystem?
Yeah, and if I could, Paul, I think that you pointed out a very important distinction. A lot of the social unrest around these data centers is their association with AI, and people have worries about AI. But you made the difference between inference, like me sitting down and asking a query, an inference compute, if you will, right, is very different from mostly what we talk about with data centers. And it's mostly those AI nurseries, those AI training grounds, that's where all of that compute has to take place. And those require a kind of concentrated, that, as you said, gigawatt size load. The inference computing doesn't require that. It might take that form, but you can imagine much smaller banks of computers using these AI agents that are now trained and grown up and shipped out to a much smaller site that very obviously could have a megawatt or two or 20 or 50 of solar and some battery banks. It could be in a warehouse somewhere.
So distributing the data center itself.
Distributing the data centers is possible on the inference side. It's not as possible on the nursery side, right?
Not yet.
Not yet. So okay, so we have these big loads, whatever the case may be. We have some very, very smart people working inside the data center question. People at Google, people at Meta. In fact, there's some very accomplished former vote solarians who are working on how can a data center assure it's a business, right? How can it assure that it gets the inputs that it needs? And one of those inputs is a pretty secure, steady supply of high volumes of energy. We think that they can still work on more efficient computing, more flexible, ways to provide the function with better chips, better cooling systems, which require less power. There's lots of innovation that they should be thinking about. That's not our area, but all the best minds tell me that that is possible, whether it's the chips themselves, the cooling systems, or the algorithms that the efficiency of the algorithms that they run. But I think when they start talking about the actual gross raw power, we need electrons to flow into the site because we use them for both the compute and the cooling and all the infrastructure needs. We want them to think about how much experience we've already had with distributed. The recovery patterns when you have clean energy powered microgrids, when the grid goes down in response to disaster or things like that. These microgrids, these community power networks with their own generation, clean energy generation, they provide the startup capacity. They provide the resilience. They keep things going, keep critical loads going. We've had now years and years, even decades of experience with this. So those data center developers, they need to have that continued faith. And that's why I'm glad there's a lot of really smart people working on this. And then embrace this very forward-thinking use of distributed technology and understand that for pennies on the dollar, you can support the deployment to low-income communities, to stressed communities, to energy-burdened communities of solar and storage and smart thermostats and induction cooking and managed vehicle charging and all of these things. And we have the resources to coordinate all of these resources out on the grid in a way that literally frees up capacity that can be delivered through the existing wires to these data centers. That is a very different way of thinking about how you supply capacity, how you provide reliability services, voltage, VAR, the kind of electrical support, ancillary services that we talk about for the grid, keeping frequency of the grid, keeping the voltage of the grid all stabilized, all does matter in how you provide power. The more expensive way to do it, in fact, is to try to build your own power and have all of those resources and services either behind the meter or through some direct access agreement, right? Now they're not only are you denying some of the benefit of your investment to this whole wider community, you are taking a more expensive route. You're building more expensive infrastructure to supply this need. And if we have all the other conditions in place, emissions reduction, making sure that the communities themselves are participant and elevated in the decision making, making sure that rates are kept even, this turns out to be the best way to meet those conditions. And I really want the data center investors to think about that. There's a huge opportunity. I'm not going to lie. I also think it's a PR move for them, right? The opposition that they're feeling is real, based on real conditions. They could do well to earn the goodwill of the communities that are impacted by their investments and who may not see the direct economic benefits in any way. This is a way to change that equation and everybody get what they want and make an affordable, speedy transition to a clean energy future.
So we've been talking a little bit in theoreticals in terms of like if we can do this and this is a great resource and everything. Are we starting to see developers embrace this as a solution?
I spoke about Google in particular. I think Google has agreed in places like Duke territory and has put forward ideas about how they can help existing programs distribute more of these resources. So I think the short answer is yes. We are also seeing, and I think this is really important, we're seeing the regulators who ultimately have to agree to these large load interconnections, right? And the state government apparatus, like the Michigan PSC, the Public Service Commission in Michigan, telling utilities that when they are planning on meeting this new load, if they don't include a distributed virtual power plant option, their plans may be denied. So they're putting them on notice in places like Michigan. I mentioned the CERGA, CRGA, the Clean and Reliable Grid Affordability Act in Illinois, which is doing a lot of work to clean up the queues in the MISO queues for new projects coming on. It is really putting the virtual power plant question, the ability to create that capacity through this network of resources out on buildings and in the community, putting it in the regulatory space, and regulators are now dealing with the actual implementation of these VPPs. It's not theoretical; it's real. It's happening on the ground. We were a little disappointed in Minnesota, for example. We did get the commission to agree to look at the value of front of the meter distributed batteries owned by the utilities, but they declined at this point to require this virtual power plant idea, really using the community power networks. And these are all places, you think about the Twin Cities, you think about Chicago, you think about Detroit, places that are probably going to host some of this new load and data capacity. So we've got two kind of really good positive steps forward, one less clear, but making progress in the Midwest. It's real, a great opportunity. We've got a MISO and a PJM connection. So we have the traditional vertical utility, and we've got a more unstructured market like PJM. So we're experimenting with a lot of things. We're seeing successes. I think that's going to play out. Let's look at California. California is clearly going to be a hot spot for data centers, just like Northern Virginia was. You mentioned that, right? All the contractors and you drive out to the airport, you can't miss it. Well, Silicon Valley, we know that's going to happen. We've got a program, the Demand Side Grid Services Program, DSGS. The legislature has agreed, and I think you're getting support from the tech industry as well to refund that program. Governor Newsom defunded it in his budget. There's already bills to put another $22 million into it to make sure that it functions this summer, because it will provide the kind of support that we need exactly at this moment from distributed services. In fact, it's probably the most sophisticated program out there. We have been fighting very hard for that. Massachusetts has a strong language in its climate bill on distributed resources. So I think the developers are seeing these signals. We've seen examples of them engaging, and the regulators and legislatures are really seeing the opportunity as well and starting to kind of demand that it happen. And I think that's because they're cognizant of the risks that are involved with other approaches.
And what's striking to me is 22 million to help facilitate this is a relatively small investment in terms of getting this right. What you're talking about is really scaling the broad capabilities of the distributed resource environment to really bring this type of economic engine to the regions. I think it's fantastic.
Let me pick up on that 22 million. I think that's a really it's an important point. These are both pinpoint investments. As a homeowner, I have a very high bill. I want to invest in something that's going to help me manage that bill. It's a very concentrated investment. A small addition to me, a small value add to me, goes a long way in helping me make the decision to put solar and storage on my roof. That small addition could be from the public sphere, it could be from developers through the public entity, and it buys a lot of capacity, 10 kW on my roof. And if I have 100,000 customers, do the math, right? We're talking about a lot of capacity for very small leveraged amounts of money. If it's targeted correctly, we can avoid lots of overbuild of other kinds of assets. We can really accelerate the deployment of lots and lots of smaller, but in aggregate, big resources. And we can help both individuals and the rate base entirely target higher bills, try to bring them down, try to bring down the overall cost. And also, it goes without saying that now my house and anyone else that's been able and fortunate enough to invest in solar and storage is more reliable. And in fact, my house being more reliable makes all the houses on my block that are behind the same transformer, it makes them more reliable. So this is a shared investment. And that, I think, to your point earlier, that makes it more economically and more energy efficient.
So I'm going to take the conversation in a little bit of a tangent right now, okay? Because you started talking about the economic efficiency, the overbuild, and avoiding a lot of that with some of these distributed resources, and we haven't even talked yet about whether AI, broadly speaking, is in a bubble or not, right? And we haven't talked about the implications of this huge infrastructure build out that is building capacity and building power infrastructure that may not necessarily be required at the end of the day. We haven't necessarily seen enterprise demand for AI match the infrastructure build. We're building before they come, right? To completely paraphrase and destroy the old adage from Field of Dreams. It feels like this concept of virtual power plants and distributed resources helps us to get around that because those still have value, regardless of what actually happens within the digital infrastructure over the course of the next 10 years.
One of my favorite things, Paul, is when someone interviewing me or interrogating me actually does my work for me. I love it. You you nailed it. Um, what is the safest, no regrets path to meeting the needs of the economy? And I'm not even suggesting that data centers are absolutely necessary, but let's be real, let's be honest. That this is the major economic force right now in the economy that could change things. We're still seeing investment in electrification of vehicles. Induction cookers are becoming more popular. Heat pumps are becoming more proficient, more cost effective. Right, that's all going to continue. So the big delta, the big change here is coming from this investment in a new type of computing infrastructure and its impact on the grid. So that's billions of dollars that are going to be spent. We all know that spending it on decrepit old nuclear power plants and keeping zombie coal plants alive and putting jet engines into our neighborhoods is a dead end investment. It might work for right now. If there is a bubble, they're going to be stranded assets. Even if there isn't a bubble, they are going to be stranded assets, right? So we know what that path leads to, whether or not we are a bull or a bear on data center investments. What we also know, and this is exactly what you pointed out, putting those putting that need into distributed assets, both on the demand and the generation side, out there, third party and utility and public investment, that is a no regrets pathway. It provides durable value to the grid. It is a zero marginal cost fuel. It is a proven technology with decades of useful life. It is easily controllable through modern means. And actually, in fact, the AI, the compute power that we're building, is an enhancement to that. We now have very sophisticated algorithms to connect all of these disparate resources on the demand and the generation side in multiple source places, right? Multiple nodes on the grid to operate them in conjunction with each other and pull in the same direction, which is towards reliability, towards resilience, towards affordability, and away from really peaky kind of expensive deployment of energy. And I think there's a piece to this that's interesting and it's quite complicated, which is the utility compact that we have worked under for the last 150 years, which is it's this agreement that we've had that utilities get to be the monopoly in supplying power because there's a natural monopoly. You don't want to have 5 different companies' wires coming into your house and get to pick between them. You want one wire coming in, pretty simple, easy for the consumer. There's a long-standing set of agreements, but part of that agreement was that they would get compensated as if they were in a profit-seeking market, but we were going to kind of limit that. Well, 2 things have happened. The profit generated from building infrastructure is what really drives them. So the energy itself is not the biggest source of profit for the utility. Now, maybe for the upstream companies, but for the utilities, about 70% of our bill is for the infrastructure. It's for the balancing services, the pipes, the wires, the transmission lines, all of that. Only about 30% is for the energy, and a lot of that is kind of a pass through. So if affordability is being driven by utility profits, one of the problems is they're investing in the wrong kind of infrastructure. So we want to get them to invest in the right infrastructure, and maybe we want to share that out where they don't need to be the ones investing in the infrastructure. I'm not saying take away the profitability, but maybe the naked profit seeking activities and motivations can be modified to be more beneficial both to the companies and to others. The interest rate, the cost of capital goes up and down, but the profit rate for the utilities just keeps going up, and that there's something wrong with that formulation. But we want to build the kind of infrastructure that shares some of those investment opportunities as much as possible wherever there isn't a natural monopoly, and that reduces our vulnerability to price fluctuations. It's kind of a hedge against things like the war in right now, right? That impact is muted in countries that are not as dependent on fossil fuel combustion. If they have more wind, and story in the Times today or yesterday about China's go for it attitude about wind, it's helping them weather this storm in ways that our current federal policies aren't allowing us to do.
All right. So, Sachu, fascinating conversation. All right. I think we've touched on a whole bunch of different things. I'm gonna ask one last question for you. Okay. Let's optimistically let's put ourselves 5 or 10 years into the future, and what's happened over the course of those 5 or 10 years that has unlocked this potential, this opportunity, both from an economic side for the data centers as well as from a distributed resource and generation side, demand side. What's happened and where do we sit? What do you see this industry looking like in the 2030, 2035 timeframe?
I love that question, and um, that may not be a quick final answer because there's a lot. But let me sum it up. People love solar. It works for them. Over the next 5 years, we are going to see a growing chorus of organized, united communities understanding their needs, demanding more access to solar. We are going to see, I believe, commissions being convinced of the viability of now these assets that people are demanding being used in their planning purposes, and they're going to hold utilities accountable to that. We are already seeing that happen. We've seen tremendous ratepayer revolt against the Salt River Project governance. We've seen Georgia elections that centered on affordability. We've seen governors in New Jersey and Virginia bring the affordability question to their inaugural platforms. Often, I am very proud to say, with talking points that reflect Vote Solar's influence on the policy debates. This is the pressure that I'm seeing. I think the coming midterms, I think the growing viability of this technology is going to put this resource out there. It's going to make both decision makers and operators like the utilities accountable. That's my job. That's my team's job, is to point out, hey, you are leaving this very efficient resource on the table. And in fact, you are leaving this growth path out of your plans if you don't facilitate solar and storage deployment. That accountability 5 years from now is going to result in a system that I believe could host upwards of 150, maybe 180 gigawatts of distributed solar, a 3 or 4x increase. And I think that distributed solar and storage is going to cost a fraction of what it costs right now. There's a proven pathway for this. Australia has walked this path. Other industrialized countries have walked this path. Australia's paying under $1 a watt for solar, probably under $1.50 a watt for solar attached to storage. We are paying roughly 3 to 5 times that. That is the path that we will walk over the next 5 years. I feel very confident that our allies like Solar United Neighbors on the campaign side, our partners like Grid Lab on the analysis side, or private companies like Kavala, think tanks like RMI, Sierra Club, Environmental Defense, or Earth Justice. We are all aligned on this. we see this path unfolding in front of us, and these 5 years, I think you're going to see that progress. I feel very confident. I've listed a few bills for you that we're talking about, but it might be in Arizona, the Energy Promise Task Force that Governor Hobbs has there, the New Jersey BPU. We're all coming to this realization. We are seeing the future. We have some fights left over. We have a very intransigent incumbent energy source and lobby. Um, but we can get past this. We can get past it with the justice community, with the labor community, with the environmental community, and quite frankly, with just consumer, family-oriented kitchen table interests behind us. That's what's going to happen.
There is no doubt that this is a huge challenge for the electric power grid, for data center developers, for policymakers to get it right. I love the optimistic view of the fact that solutions exist, systemic process, market structure solutions to utilize existing technology. We don't have to go out there and create something new. We have the capabilities in hand today. Sachu Constantine, thank you so much for joining us on 8 Minute Climate Fix. Really enjoyed the conversation today.
Paul, always a pleasure. Thank you very much for having me. I really appreciate it.